Well, hello everybody, an extremely warm welcome to my channel. My name is Louise Savage of Louise Savage Muses. A warm welcome if you're a returning viewer, and an equally warm welcome if you are watching my musings/ramblings for the very first time. So, August is swiftly disappearing into the ether. It'll soon be September, and so I thought I would talk about my book of the month, which is The Kiss by Joan Lingard. Now, I came across Joan Lingard, if she's not a familiar writer to you. She's an Irish writer, and I think she spent most of her life in Ireland, but then moved to Edinburgh at some point. And she wrote a book called Across the Barricades, which was a sort of standard school reader in the UK in secondary school for a very, very long time. I had a real affection for that novel, which was looking at, you know, the troubles in Ireland, and I really admired her as a writer. But I've never read anything by her that was adult fiction. So I saw this book in a charity shop some time ago. It's one of those that's been sat on my shelf for quite a while. So I sat down and read it a few weeks ago, and I just thought it was super. I was really bowled away by it, actually. So as the cover suggests, Rodin, the sculptor, the French sculptor, is a very important, what's the word, sort of motif in this novel. And it's about an art teacher who's living in Edinburgh. But the novel opens with him in a car with his son, who's about 10. I think he's still at primary school just. And he's got all sorts of, the cars all loaded up, and his wife is in another car with their daughter, who is, I think, probably about 17, that sort of age, and they're moving house. But it transpires that they're both moving to different apartments. The marriage has broken down, and so the couple have decided to live at other ends of the same street. He's living with their son. He's called Cormac, the protagonist of this story, the art teacher. He's living with his son, and his wife is living with their daughter. And this book brilliantly explores marriage. It explores that scenario in a way that I don't think I've quite come across before. It's very honest, it's very raw. Neither party is without blame in this separation, as of course is true pretty much any breakup of a marriage. There's always, in my view anyway, there's usually, you know, it's partly one person, partly the other. And so I thought all of that was the exploration of marriage, and you know, how can you, the question of whether you can ever truly know somebody else is brilliantly looked at here. And I thought it was an interesting experiment, you know, the idea of the family literally splitting in half like that. And again, it works out in some ways, but absolutely doesn't work out in others. And Joan Lingard looks at that very carefully. But also, that isn't really what the novel's about. That's the consequence of Cormac's action or inaction. So Cormac, one of the catalysts for the breakup of the relationship is that he has lost his job. He's an art teacher, but he's been asked to leave because he took a group of students on a school trip, and an incident happened with a young girl called Clorinda, who's only 15 years old, and she is absolutely obsessed with the artist Gwen John. So not only do you learn quite a bit about Rodin in this book, you also learn about Gwen John. So if you're somebody who's interested in art or who likes art as a backdrop of a novel, I think this would work very well for you. And I loved all of that because he's a teacher who is passionate about sculpture, particularly about Rodin. He is a sculptor himself, Cormac. He sculpts at home. He's had exhibitions and so on. So he's really keen to pass on that passion for sculpture to his students. But often, as teachers often find, their passion is transmitted, but not necessarily the love for the subject. So there's some really very realistic moments, I think, in this book in the classroom, and the sorts of questions the students are asking and things like that seem very, very genuine to me. And also, I think it looks at, my reading of it anyway was, I took many, many trips abroad. I went to Greece a lot with students when I was teaching. And if you actually sat and really, really thought about what you were doing, you would never take a trip like that, because there are so many things that can go wrong. There's so many imponderables. And unfortunately, society has tended towards quite a litigious approach to that kind of activity. And so the mountains of paperwork and, risk assessments and all sorts of things that you have to do before you, and the costings, and, before you even get on the coach to leave the school, is mind-boggling. So, I think this novel captures that pressure. It captures the pressure that there are two teachers on the trip, and it really, the pressure that they're under, and the sort of what's the word? The unpredictability of the students' behaviour when you're in that in a foreign country is really explored nicely here. Now, the other thing that I loved about it, there's so much. It's not a chunky book, and it's reasonably sized font, but there's an awful lot in this novel. So the story of Cormac's daughter, there's also a fantastic story arc around her, and a kind of sort of rites of passage type story, which again I thought was explored really, really well. And the novel looks at parenting too. It looks at the way that Cormac's way of dealing with the children is not necessarily the same as the way that his wife deals with the children, and the sort of preconceptions that he had about it being the best thing for his daughter to live with his wife and his son to live with him, and that how that doesn't quite settle down in the way that he might have anticipated. So his daughter, has this storyline of her own, which again I can't really talk about because it might give spoilers away. But it also explores the impact of all of that on the son as well. So it's a really, I thought this book was a really effective scrutiny of a family under pressure, a family in a situation where circumstances were changing and quite rapidly changing. And there's an awful lot of love in this book. There's a lot of respect for each other. And I really admired the way that Cormac is able to give his children space when they need space. These parents are not helicopter parents. They're allowing their children to explore the world a little bit on their own and make their own mistakes. And I really valued that, because I do worry in contemporary society in the UK, certainly, that we are smothering our children and perhaps sometimes treating them as friends and equals rather than actually respecting that parent-child sort of advisory type of relationship. Now that's a pet peeve of mine, so forgive me. I do sometimes find myself banging on about it. But I really, really commend this book to you. And also, if you haven't been to Paris, you will find that you're walking the streets of Paris a lot in this novel. If you have been to Paris, like I have, you will really enjoy being reminded of some of the features of the landscape and some of the art. So yeah, it was a real... I love it when you open a book, and I didn't really have many expectations. As I say, I'd enjoyed the one other novel that I knew of hers. She writes really, really well. I think it's really crisp, really crisp prose, and she doesn't mess about. There's no faffiness to this writing. If you've just read something really poetic and then you move on to read a novel by Joan Lingard, I don't think you're going to be too far disappointed. So anyway, hope you've had a really good reading month. I don't know whether any of you have read this novel and have got thoughts on it. If you have, please let me know what you thought of it. I'm always very interested when people don't like a novel that I've enjoyed, and the reasons why. There was some really, really interesting reflections on Hamnet after the last video that I made. So, please don't be shy to comment if I'm banging on about something and raving about it, but you've had a different reading experience, because I think that's partly what talking about books should be all about. If we all agreed all the time, it'd be really boring, wouldn't it? So, and it would stifle creativity. So there we are. Loved this book. Highly recommend it. Take care. Happy reading. Speak to you all soon. Bye.